Rain was pouring down that morning when Jasmine Parker stood outside the glass. Doors of the Monarch Hotel, her uniform soaked through, and her heart pounding like a drum. She'd worked there for nearly 2 years, cleaning rooms, polishing silver, serving smiles to guests who barely saw her. But today was different. Today, the manager had called her into the office. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her nerves. Maybe it's about the promotion, she whispered to herself. Though deep down, she knew it wasn't. Inside, Mr. Stevens, tall, white, and cold as the marble desk behind him, didn't even look up when she walked in. He was stirring his coffee, the way he always did when he was about to say something unpleasant. "Jasmine," he said without emotion, "we've had some complaints." Her stomach dropped. "Complaints? About what, sir?" He finally met her eyes, his expression flat. "Some guests have mentioned they feel uncomfortable with your attitude. They say you seem distant, unapproachable." Jasmine blinked. "Unapproachable? Sir, I always greet guests. I smile. He raised his hand, cutting her off. "Look, I'm not saying it's intentional, but perception matters. You understand?" She nodded slowly. "I understand perception, sir. But is this about my work or about my skin?" For the first time, his hand stopped stirring. The spoon clinked against the cup, echoing in the silence. He didn't answer. That silence told her everything. A few hours later, she was walking out of the hotel with her box of belongings, her apron, her cleaning gloves, a photo of her mother tucked between folded towels. No one said goodbye. Not even the co-workers she'd shared lunch breaks with for months. They just watched her leave, eyes full of pity and fear. Outside, the rain hadn't stopped. It soaked her hair and ran down her cheeks, mixing with tears she refused to let fall. She walked aimlessly, her reflection rippling in puddles like a ghost of the person she used to be. As she waited for the bus, a white woman in a business suit stood beside her. The woman kept glancing at Jasmine's wet uniform, then clutched her purse tighter, stepping slightly away. Jasmine noticed but said nothing. She'd seen that reaction too many times to be surprised. When the bus finally came, Jasmine sat in the back, staring out the window. Her mind raced between anger and exhaustion. I did everything right, she thought. I worked hard. I kept quiet. I smiled when they insulted me. And still, this is what I get. Her phone buzzed. A text from her mother. You okay, baby? Jasmine stared at the screen for a long time before replying. Yeah, Mom, just tired. That night she couldn't sleep. She replayed every detail in her mind, the fake smiles, the whispers, the subtle looks that said you don't belong here. She'd tried to ignore it all, hoping hard work could silence hate. But the truth was clear now. Some people didn't see her as a worker. They saw her as a black woman who should know her place. Lying on her bed, she whispered, I'm done being silent. The next morning, she woke up with a different kind of energy, fierce, cold and focused. She opened her laptop and began typing. The words came out like fire, her story, her truth. She didn't sugarcoat anything. She wrote about the humiliation, the quiet racism, the lies hidden behind smiles. She titled her post, They Fired Me for Being Black. By afternoon, the post had gone viral. Thousands of comments poured in, some filled with support, others with anger and denial. News outlets reached out for interviews. Activists shared her story. People she'd never met were calling for the hotel to be held accountable. And for the first time in her life, Jasmine felt something powerful. She was seen. Mr. Stevens saw it too. The hotel's inbox was flooded with backlash. Bookings were canceled. Guests demanded answers. 3 days later, Jasmine got a call from the hotel's corporate office. Miss Parker, the voice said, smooth but nervous. We'd like to offer you your job back, with a raise and an apology from management. She laughed, a sharp, hollow sound. You didn't want me back because I was good, she said. You want me back because you got caught. The voice on the phone hesitated. We're trying to make things right. Jasmine took a long pause. Then start by making things equal, she said softly, then hung up. She looked out the window. The same city that once made her feel invisible now buzzed with her name. She didn't know what would come next, but for once she wasn't afraid. Because this time, the world was watching. Her fight wasn't over. It had just begun. If you believe no one should lose their job for the color of their skin, Share this story. Let Jasmine's voice be a reminder. Silence only protects the guilty. Speak up. Stand tall. Because change begins when you refuse to stay quiet. The morning light crept through Jasmine's window, but she didn't feel its warmth. Her phone kept buzzing, notifications, comments, messages from strangers. Her post had reached nearly 500,000 views overnight. People were calling her brave. Some were sharing their own stories of workplace racism. Others, hiding behind anonymous usernames, called her a liar. Scrolling through the comments, Jasmine's chest tightened. She wanted to feel proud, but instead she felt exposed. Every word she'd written came from pain, and now that pain was on display for the entire world. Still, there was no going back. She brewed a cheap cup of coffee and sat by her window, watching the street below. Her neighborhood wasn't fancy, cracked sidewalks, old cars, kids chasing each other barefoot, but it was home. A place where she didn't have to smile to prove she belonged. Her best friend Tamika called. "Girl, you trending like crazy." Jasmine sighed. "Yeah, I saw. They talking about you on the morning news," Tamika said. "They called you a whistleblower. Said you might start a movement." "A movement?" Jasmine laughed bitterly. "I just told the truth." "Exactly," Tamika replied. "That's how movements start." Before Jasmine could respond, there was a knock at her door. A hard, rhythmic boom, boom, boom. She froze. "Hold on, someone's at the door." When she opened it, 2 men in dark suits stood in the hallway. They flashed badges. "Miss Jasmine Parker?" Her pulse quickened. "Yes?" "I'm Agent Collins." "This is Agent Rivera. We're with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. We'd like to talk about your complaint against the Monarch Hotel." She blinked in disbelief. "Complaint? I didn't file one." Collins smiled faintly. "You didn't have to. Someone did it on your behalf." They sat at her small kitchen table, sipping coffee from chipped mugs while Jasmine answered their questions. They were patient, listening carefully as she recounted everything. The whispers, the unfair firing, the way Mr. Stevens wouldn't meet her eyes. When they left, Collins shook her hand. "You did the right thing speaking up. Change doesn't happen without courage." After they left, Jasmine sat in silence. The weight of what was happening began to settle in. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every worker who'd been silenced, overlooked, or pushed aside because of the color of their skin. That night, she opened her laptop again. The cursor blinked on a new post. "They're investigating." She wrote about the visit, about how justice wasn't just a word, it was a process. She reminded her readers that fighting back didn't mean being angry, it meant being unbreakable. The post went viral again. More news outlets reached out. Talk shows wanted interviews. Activists offered legal support. But not everyone was supportive. She started receiving anonymous messages, some telling her to go back where she came from, others warning her to stop, stirring trouble. At first, she ignored them. But then one night, she found a letter slipped under her apartment door. No name, no return address. Just 3 words written in red ink. "Stay in line." Her hands shook as she held it. The paper smelled faintly of coffee, like the lobby of the Monarch Hotel. For the first time since she posted her story, Jasmine felt fear crawl back into her chest. She locked her doors, closed her curtains, and tried to steady her breathing. The next morning, she went to the police station. The officer behind the desk, an older white man with a badge that read O'Connor, listened half-heartedly as she explained. "You think it's from the hotel?" he asked, chewing gum lazily. "I don't know," she said. "But someone's trying to scare me." He shrugged. "Could be a prank. We'll file a report, but unless there's a direct threat, not much we can do." As she left the station, she overheard 2 officers chuckle. "She's probably just looking for attention," one muttered. Jasmine clenched her fists but kept walking. She knew that look, that tone, that quiet. Dismissal disguised as procedure. She'd lived it her entire life. But this time she wasn't going to back down. That evening, she went live on social media. Thousands tuned in. She spoke calmly, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "They want me to stay quiet," she said. "They want me to stop talking. But silence is how they win. I'm not doing this just for me. I'm doing it for every worker who's ever been told their voice doesn't matter. For every woman who's been told to smile through disrespect. For every black person who's been told to be grateful for scraps. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away from the camera. You can threaten me, mock me, try to break me, but I'm not going anywhere. When she ended the stream, her inbox exploded. Hundreds of messages, people thanking her, sharing their stories, calling her a hero. But one message stood out. It was from an email address she recognized, mstevensmonarchhotel.com. The subject line read, "You don't know what you've started." She hesitated before opening it. The message inside was short. You should have stayed quiet. You think you're changing something? You're ruining lives. Her hands trembled, but then she laughed softly. Good, she whispered. Maybe some lives needed ruining. That night, she received another call from a reporter with a national network. They wanted her to appear live on TV to share her story. For a moment, she hesitated. She was scared, tired, and overwhelmed. But then she thought about her mother, who'd worked 2 jobs and still got called girl by her bosses. She thought about her younger cousins, growing up in a world that still measured their worth by their color. Jasmine said yes. The next morning, as cameras flashed and microphones surrounded her, Jasmine walked into the studio, not as a maid, not as a victim, but as a woman who had finally found her voice. She smiled at the reporter and adjusted her mic. Are you ready to begin? The reporter asked. Jasmine looked straight into the camera. I already have, she said. And somewhere in a penthouse office overlooking the city, Mr. Stevens was watching. His hands were trembling, not with power but with fear, because for the first time the truth wasn't silent. It had a name. If Jasmine's courage moved you, share her story. Speak up for what's right. Because silence only helps the oppressor, never the oppressed. One voice can start a movement. Be that voice. Jasmine sat in the courtroom, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of air conditioning and the shuffle of papers. She could hear her heart pounding in her chest. After months of interviews, investigations, and public noise, this was it. The hearing that would decide everything. Across the aisle, Mr. Stevens sat stiffly with his expensive lawyer. His perfect hair, his $1,000 suit, it was all there. But something was missing. The smug confidence he once carried was gone. His eyes darted nervously from the judge to the crowd to Jasmine, who sat calm, steady, and unbroken. The judge entered and everyone stood. To Jasmine's surprise, the judge was a black woman, dignified, sharp-eyed, and calm. Her nameplate read Judge Monique Harris. Please be seated, the judge said. The attorney for the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission stood. Your Honor, this case isn't just about a wrongful termination. It's about years of systemic mistreatment, discrimination, and intimidation that went unchecked because no one had the courage to speak up. Until Miss Jasmine Parker did. Jasmine's stomach tightened as the lawyer spoke her name. She could feel every eye in the room turn toward her. Mr. Stevens' lawyer rose next. His voice was smooth, too smooth. Your Honor, my client is a respected businessman. The claims made against him are exaggerated. Ms. Parker was dismissed. Due to performance issues, not race. The social media frenzy has painted my client unfairly. Performance issues? Jasmine thought. She wanted to stand up and shout, I worked harder than anyone in that hotel. But she stayed silent. She had already spoken. Now the evidence would speak for her. The EEOC lawyer called witnesses, former employees, housekeepers, bellboys, waitstaff. One by one they came forward. Their voices trembled at first, but then they found courage. They spoke about being passed over for promotions, about racial slurs whispered in the break room, about how Mr. Stevens preferred a certain image for his hotel. By the time Jasmine was called to testify, the air in the courtroom was heavy with truth. She stood, walked to the witness stand, and took the oath. Ms. Parker, the lawyer began, can you tell the court in your own words what happened the day you were fired? Jasmine took a breath. I had just finished cleaning one of the executive suites. Mr. Stevens called me into his office. He said the guests had complained about me, said I made them uncomfortable. When I asked why, he said they didn't feel I fit the brand image. Her voice broke for a moment, but she kept going. That's when I realized it wasn't about my work. It was about my skin. A hush fell over the room. Even the judge's eyes softened. Mr. Stevens shifted uncomfortably, whispering to his lawyer. "Thank you, Ms. Parker," the lawyer said. "One final question. Why did you decide to go public?" Jasmine looked down for a second, then up again, her gaze steady. "Because silence keeps you small. And I got tired of feeling small." When she stepped down, the room was quiet. Even Mr. Stevens didn't look at her. After hours of testimony, evidence, and closing arguments, the judge took a brief recess. Jasmine waited in the hallway, her heart racing. Reporters stood outside with cameras, but she ignored them. Tamika was there, holding her hand. "You did good," Tamika whispered. When the courtroom doors opened again, everyone hurried back in. "Judge!" Harris looked serious but calm. "In reviewing the evidence," she said, "it's clear that the Monarch Hotel engaged in discriminatory practices. The court rules in favor of Ms. Jasmine Parker." Gasps filled the room. Mr. Stevens' lawyer's jaw tightened. Jasmine covered her mouth as tears filled her eyes. "The hotel will be required to issue a public apology," the judge continued, "and Ms. Parker will receive compensation for emotional and professional damages. Additionally, the Monarch Hotel will be placed under diversity oversight for 3 years. Mr. Stevens slumped back in his chair. For once, his power meant nothing. Jasmine stood slowly. The courtroom blurred through her tears. But she felt lighter than she had in years. Outside, cameras flashed as she stepped into the sunlight. Reporters shouted questions, but she raised her hand and spoke clearly. "This isn't just my victory," she said. "It's for everyone who's ever been silenced, doubted, or disrespected. Don't be afraid to speak up. Even if your voice shakes, speak anyway." Her video from that day went viral again, but this time, it wasn't about outrage. It was about hope. A few weeks later, Jasmine received a letter in the mail. It was handwritten, the ink a little smudged. "Dear Miss Parker, I watched your case. I'm a maid, too. Been one for 20 years. You made me believe I'm worth more than silence. Thank you, Raza." Jasmine smiled through her tears. She pinned the letter to her fridge. Months passed. She began speaking at schools, community centers, and worker unions. People wanted to hear her story, not because she was famous, but because she was real. She wasn't a symbol. She was a survivor. One evening, she walked past a coffee shop downtown and saw something that made her stop. A help wanted sign in the window, manager position open. She laughed softly, walked inside, and filled out the application. When the barista handed her a cup of coffee, she noticed the name written on it, Jasmine, Strong. It wasn't just her name anymore. It was her story. If Jasmine's story inspired you, share it. Speak out against racism and injustice wherever you see it. Change doesn't begin in courts, it begins in hearts. Be brave enough to challenge silence. Because every voice matters, including yours.